death. Still with me, criminal defense attorneys Jack Rice and Josh Schiffer. Listen, gentlemen, we've been together for a while on air. All three of us watching that were like, just couldn't stand to watch the police officer starting off and tasing. Start there, Josh.
It's dehumanizing to watch that, and then to hear about the idea that that they didn't remember or the officer forgot whether they closed the back door. I don't know what kind of cars you guys drive. Mine has a light that pretty clear if the door's not closed. And you're talking about someone, an officer, who has an affirmative obligation to take care of the person in their custody. As soon as you are in custody, you can't control yourself. You are dependent on another person.
And not to interrupt, but I have to say, I wonder, is it impossible to be kind at the same time enforcing being safe yourself and others?
I sit here watching this and I hear her voice and it screams mental illness. It screams it. And what you get from this officer is, I'll get her up. And then he just starts using this stun gun on her. And my problem with something like this is I regularly see officers, not all officers, but these officers who shouldn't be doing this. What they do is they escalate. They escalate everything because their answer is, well, if that doesn't work, I'll do more. But when you have mental illness, it's different. They need to pivot. Instead, what we're seeing is something else. And this is the almost foreseeable outcome when you get a failure of this type.
And that's the foreseeable, because again, they being all officers nationwide, should be receiving training on how to deal with mentally ill. So it becomes a question of, were they not trained, or rather, are they not implementing the training, Josh?
That's the real problem, and I'll tell you, they are trained. Peace officer standards training in Georgia requires some of these materials be covered for precisely this reason. If you haven't grown up or know someone with mental health issues, you don't know what it's like to interact with someone who is not oriented to time, space, and manner the way the rest of us are. And you see that lack of empathy and connection with that tasing, and that's frightening.
And it's the wiring piece of this. See, the training happens. I've had cases like this where we've had officers who are trained in this, but it's not about training somebody who is not simply capable of absorbing that training. Their response is to go a different direction, and they do. And again, this is what we see when you have people who are inappropriately in places dealing with the mentally ill. That's why we have deaths across the country.
Yes.
There was just one in Minneapolis right before I came down. And so this is just like that.
Wow. And it's just like this, but I have to ask this, foreseeable. Does this mean, do you all think a civil lawsuit will prevail? I think if you just a knee-jerk reaction, look, both of you reacted when I asked that. Josh, what do you think?
So there's going to be some really specific immunities that officers rightfully are the benefit of.
Of course.
And there's going to, and Mr. Crump, who's one of the finest lawyers in the nation with these issues, knows he's got some struggle. It's the egregiousness of the factual situation that's gonna get this done.
In that case I just mentioned in Minneapolis, Crump has that case too. And what happens now is, you know what's going to get the attention of Georgia and Minnesota and New York and California is
money.
Ching, ching.
Absolutely, money. We know that. And it's sad because it does not make the victim come back. It does not help the family heal. But I think it does draw attention to circumstances in which this was preventable. 100% preventable.
And we're seeing that conversation finally start. There were some West Coast communities that were actually going to require, I believe there's a discussion in Minneapolis right now, of requiring mental health providers, not law enforcement.
Because the FBI actually came in and had to force Minneapolis. You remember they did that same thing in New Jersey? They did it in Camden or someplace else. And so they were having to do that there. And sometimes, if what it requires is imposing a change, then so be it.
Right, and another person, because you're right, I think Nima Rahmani may have some familiarity with this and may have talked about this on the West Coast, where you have mental health specialists and people trained to go with, so you can handle these.
And you look at the history of mental health in criminal justice, for generations we had facilities for people in the community that had mental health problems, but beginning in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, we shut those all down. In the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, our prison system became the treatment choice for the mentally ill,
which is
and
not.
it wasn't a choice.
No, it's not.
In the 70s, where we saw this, the decision to go from large institutions to community institutions.
You have
but
to
they
tell
didn't
us about
fund
that.
them.
I don't remember that, Jack. You may remember that. I can't remember back then. I'm just saying. So, you know.
Great.
No, not to interrupt you, but I do, right? And everything that happened when the facilities closed, all of the people in the facilities were literally across the nation shuffled into the street.
Well, the street, and you know where they went next? Into our prisons.
Right, right. You're right. All right. Still much more.